Screwtape Letters, number 8. My dear Wormwood, yes, courtship is the time for sowing those seeds which will grow up 10 years later into domestic hatred. The enchantment of unsatisfied desires produces results which the humans can be made to mistake for the results of charity. Avail yourself to the ambiguity of the word love. Let them think that they have solved by love problems they have in fact only waived or postponed under the influence of the enchantment. While at least you have your chance to foment the problems in secret and render them chronic. The grand problem is that of unselfishness. Note, once again, the admirable work of our philological arm in substituting the negative unselfishness for the enemy's positive charity. Thanks to this, you can from the very outset teach a man to surrender benefits, not that others may be happy in having them, but that he may be unselfish in foregoing them. That is a great point gained. Another great help, where the parties are concerned are male or female, is the divergence of view about unselfishness which we have built up between the sexes. A woman understands by unselfishness chiefly taking trouble for others. A man means by not giving trouble to others. As a result, a woman who is quite far gone in the enemy's service will make a nuisance of herself on a larger scale than any man except those whom our Father has dominated completely. And, conversely, a man will long live in the enemy's camp before he undertakes as much spontaneous work to please others as a quite ordinary woman may do every day. Thus, while the woman thinks of doing good offices and a man of respecting other people's rights, each sex, without any obvious unreason, can and does regard the other as radically selfish. On top of these confusions, you can now introduce a few more. The erotic enchantment produces a mutual complacence in which each is really pleased to give in to the wishes of the other. They also know that the enemy demands of them a degree of charity which, if attained, would result in similar actions. You must make them establish as law for their whole married life the decree that mutual self-sacrifice, which is at present sprouting naturally out of the enchantment, but which, when the enchantment dies away, they will not have charity enough to enable them to perform. They will not see the trap, since they are under the double blindness of mistaking sexual excitement for charity and of thinking that excitement will last. When once a sort of official, legal, or nominal unselfishness has been established as a rule for the keeping of which their emotional resources have died away and their spiritual resources have not yet grown, the most delightful results will be following. In discussing any joint action, it becomes obligatory that A should argue in favor of B's supposed wishes and against his own, while B does the opposite. It is often impossible to find out either party's real wishes. With luck, they end by doing something that neither wants, while each feels a glow of self-righteousness and harbors a secret claim to preferential treatment for the unselfishness shown, and a secret grudge against the other for the ease with which the sacrifice has been accepted. Later on, you can venture on what might be called generous conflict illusion. This game is best played with more than 2 players. In a family with grown-up children, for example. Something quite trivial, like having tea in the garden, is proposed. One member takes care to make it quite clear, though not in so many words, that he would rather not, but is, of course, prepared to do so out of unselfishness. The others instantly withdraw their proposal, ostensibly through their unselfishness, but really because they don't want to be used as a sort of lay figure upon which the first speaker practices petty altruisms. But he is not going to be done out by his debauch of unselfishness. Ugh. Gosh, all these words, so complicated. But he is not going to be outdone by his debauch of unselfishness either. He insists on doing what others want. They insist on doing what he wants. Passions are aroused. Soon someone is saying, "Very well then, I won't have any tea at all." And the real quarrel ensues with bitter resentment on both sides. You see how it's done? If each side had been frankly contending for its own real wish, they would have all kept within the bounds of reason and courtesy. But just because contention is reversed, and each side is fighting for the other side's battle, all the bitterness which really flows from thwarted self-righteousness and obstinacy, and from the accumulated grudges of the last 10 years, is concealed from them by the nominal or official unselfishness. Of which they are doing, or at least held to be excused by it. Each side, indeed, is quite alive to cheapen the quality of the adversary's unselfishness and of the false passion into which he is trying to force them, but each manages to feel blameless and ill-used itself, and with no more dishonesty than comes natural to a human. A sensible human once said, if people knew how much ill-feeling, unselfish occasions, unselfishness causes, it would not be so often recommended from the pulpit. And again, she's the sort of woman who lives for others. You can always tell the others by their haunted expression. All this can be begun even in the period of courtship. A little real selfishness on your patient's part is often of less value in the longer run for securing his soul than the first beginnings of that elaborate and self-conscious unselfishness which one day may bloom into the sort of living that I have described. Some degree of mutual falseness, some surprise that the girl does not always notice just how unselfish he is being, can be smuggled in already. Cherish these things, and above all, don't let the young fools take notice of them. If they notice them, they will be on the road to discovering that love is not enough, that charity is needed and not yet achieved, and that no external law can supply its place. I wish Slim Trumpet could do something about undermining that young woman's sense of the ridiculous. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, you seem to be doing very little good at present. The use of his love to distract his mind from the enemy is, of course, obvious, but you reveal what poor use you are making of it when you say that the whole question of distraction and the wandering mind has now become one of the chief subjects of his prayers. That means that you have largely failed. When this or any other distraction crosses his mind, you ought to encourage him to thrust it away by sheer willpower, and try to continue in the normal prayer as if nothing had happened. Once he accepts the distraction as his present problem and lays that before the enemy, and makes it the main theme of his prayers and his endeavors, then, so far from doing good, you've done harm. Anything, even a sin, which has the total effect of moving him to close up to the enemy, makes against us in the long run. Damn. A promising line is in the following. Now that he is in love, a new idea of earthly happiness has arisen in his mind, and hence a new urgency in his purely petitionatory prayers about this war and other such matters. Now is the time for raising intellectual difficulties about prayer of that sort. False spirituality is always to be encouraged, on the seemingly pious ground that praise and communication with God are true prayer. Humans can often be lured into direct disobedience to the enemy, who, in his usual flat, commonplace, uninteresting way, has definitely told them to pray for their daily bread and to the recovery of their sick. You will, of course, conceal from him the fact that the prayer for daily bread, interpreted in a spiritual sense, is really just as crudely petitionatory as it is in any other sense. But since your patient has contracted the terrible habit of obedience, he will probably continue such crude prayers whatever you do. But you can worry him with the haunting suspicion that the practice is absurd and can have no objective result. Don't forget to use the heads I win, tails you lose argument. If the thing he prays for doesn't happen, then that is one more proof that petitionatory prayers don't work. If it does happen, he will of course be able to see some of the physical causes which led up to it, and therefore it would have happened anyway. And thus, a granted prayer becomes just as good a proof as a denied one that prayers are ineffective. You, being a spirit, will find it difficult to understand how he gets into this confusion. But you must remember that it takes time for an ultimate reality. He supposes that the enemy, like himself, sees some things as present, remembers others as past, and anticipates others as future. Or even if he believes that the enemy does not see things that way, yet in his heart of hearts he regards this as a peculiarity of the enemy's mode of perception, and doesn't really think, although he would say he did, that things as the enemy sees them are things as they are. If you try to explain to him that men's prayers today are one of the innumerable coordinates with which the enemy harmonizes the weather of tomorrow, he would reply that then the enemy always knew men were going to make those prayers, and if so, they did not pray freely, but were predestined to do so. And he would add that the weather on a given day can be traced back through its causes to the original creation of matter itself, so that whole thing, both on the human and on the material side, is given from the word go. So what? That whole thing, both on the human and on the material side, is given from the word go. What, he ought to say, of course, is obvious to us, that the problem of adapting the particular weather to the particular prayers is merely the appearance. At 2 points in its temporal mode of perception of the total problem of adapting the whole spiritual universe and the whole corporeal universe, that creation in its entirety operates at every point of space and time, or rather their kind of consciousness forces them to encounter the whole self-constant Mr. C.S.Lewis. I'm trying to work with you here. I'm trying to. But you are beyond my IQ. Alright, boo? Lordy. Lord. Shall we try this one again? My God. This is my problem. Okay. Okay. Shh. Let's try it again. Where are we? What he ought to say, of course, is obvious to us, that the problem of adapting the particular weather to the particular prayers is merely the appearance, at 2 points in his temporal mode of perception, of the total God damn. Bo, you use too many commas. Okay? We're going to try it again. What he ought to say, of course, is obvious to us, that the problem of adapting the particular weather to the particular prayers is merely the appearance. At 2 points in his temporal mode of perception, the total problem of adapting the whole spiritual universe to the whole corporeal universe, that creation in its entirety operates at every point of space and time, or rather that their kind of consciousness forces them to encounter the whole, self-consistent creative act as a series of successive events. Why, that creative act leaves room for their free will is the problem of problems. For the commas of commas. The secret behind the enemy's nonsense about love. How it does so is no problem at all, for the enemy does not foresee the humans making their free contributions in a future, but sees them doing so in his unbounded now. And obviously, to watch a man doing something is not to make him do it. But it may be replied that some meddlesome human writers, notably Boethius, have let this secret out. But in the intellectual climate which we have at last succeeded in producing throughout Western Europe, you needn't bother about that. Only the learned read old books, and we have now so dealt with the learned that they are of all men the least likely to acquire wisdom by doing so. We have done this by incalculating the historical point of view. The historical point of view, put briefly, means that when a learned man is presented with any statement in an ancient author, the one question he never asks is whether it's true. He asks who influenced the ancient author, and how far the sentiment or the statement is consistent with what he has said in other books, and what phase in the writer's development or in the general history of thought it illustrates, and how it affected later writers, and how often it has been misunderstood, especially by the learned man's own colleagues, and what the general course of criticism on it has been for the last 10 years, and what is the present state of the question. To regard the ancient writer as a possible source of knowledge, to equate that what he said could possibly modify your thoughts or your behavior, this would be rejected as unutterably simple-minded. And since we cannot deceive the whole human race all the time, it is most important thus to cut every generation off from all others. For where learning makes a free commerce between the ages, there is always the danger that the characteristic errors of one may be corrected by the characteristic truths of another. But, thanks be to our Father and the historical point of view, great scholars are now as little nourished by the past as the most ignorant mechanic who holds that history is bunk. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Gosh, my body hurts. How long is this letter? Ooh. Oh, I'll tell you what. All those commas were so intense. Ugh. I have to get to be a better reader. Doing it for you, little baby girl. But you know what? I'm probably so boring you didn't even get this far. Some money don't. My dear Wormwood, when I told you not to fill your letters with rubbish about the war, I meant, of course, that I did not want to have your father, your pencil time. Pencil time. Maybe it'll work. My dear Wormwood, when I told you not to fill your letters with rubbish about the war, I meant, of course, that I did not want to have your rather infantile rhapsodies about the death of men and the destruction of cities. Insofar as the war really concerns the spiritual state of the patient, I naturally want full reports. And on this aspect, you seem singularly obtuse. Thus you tell me with glee that there is a reason to expect heavy air raids in the town where the creature lives. This is a crying example of something I have complained about already, your readiness to forget that the main point in your immediate enjoyment of human suffering. Do you not know that bombs kill men? Or do you not realize that the patient's death at this moment is precisely what we want to avoid? He has escaped the worldly friends with whom you try to triangulate him. He has fallen in love with a very Christian woman, and is temporarily immune from your attacks on his chastity. And the various methods of corrupting his spiritual life which we've been trying are so far unsuccessful. At this present moment, as the full impact of the war draws nearer, and his worldly hopes take a proportionately lower place in his mind, full of his defense work, full of the girl, forced to attend to his neighbors more than he's ever done before, and liking it more than he's ever expected, taking out of himself, as the humans say, and daily increasing in conscious dependence on the enemy, he will almost certainly be lost to us if he is killed tonight. This is so obvious. I am ashamed to write it. I sometimes wonder if you young fiends are not kept out on temptation duty too long at a time, if you are not in some danger of becoming affected by the sentiments and values of the humans among whom you work. They, of course, do tend to regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good, but that is because we have taught them to do so. Do not let us be affected by our own propaganda. I know it seems strange that your chief aim at the moment should be the very same thing for which your patient's lover and his mother are praying, namely, his bodily safety. But so it is. You should be guarding him from like the apple of your eye. If he dies now, you lost him. If he survives the war, there's always hope. The enemy has guarded him from you through the first great wave of temptations. But if only he could be kept alive, you have time itself for your ally. The long, dull, monotonous years of middle-aged prosperity or middle-aged adversity are excellent campaigning weather. You see, it is so hard for these creatures to persevere. Persevere. Okay. My eyeballs are going crooked. How long have I been reading? Okay. The routine of adversity, the gradual decay of youthful loves and youthful hopes, the quiet despair, hardly felt as pain, of ever overcoming the chronic temptations with which we have again and again defeated them, the drabness which we create in their lives, and the inarticulate resentment with which we teach them to respond to it. All this provides admirable opportunities for wearing out a soul by attrition. If, on the other hand, the middle years prove prosperous, our position is even stronger. Prosperity knits a man to the world. He feels that he finally is in his place in it, while really it is finding its place in him. His increasing reputation, his widening circle of acquaintances, his sense of importance, the growing pressure of absorbing and agreeable work, build up in him a sense of really being at home on earth, which is just what we want. You will notice that the young are generally less unwilling to die than the middle-aged and the old. The truth is that the enemy, having oddly destined these mere animals to life in his own eternal world, has guarded them pretty effectively from the danger of feeling at home anywhere else. And that is why we must often wish long life to our patients. 70 years is not a day too much for the difficult task of unraveling their souls from heaven and building up a firm attachment to earth. While they are young, we find them always shooting off at a tangent. Even though we contrive to keep them ignorant of explicit religion, the incalculable winds of fantasy, music, and poetry, the mere face of a girl, the song of a bird, or the sight of a horizon, are always blowing our whole structure away. They will not apply themselves steadily to worldly advancement, prudent connections, and the policy of safety first. So inveterate is their appetite for heaven, that our best method at this stage of attaching them to the earth is to make them believe that earth can be turned into heaven at some future date by politics or eugenics or science or psychology or whatnot. Real worldliness is a work of time, assisted, of course, by pride. For we teach them to describe the creeping death as good sense or maturity or experience. In the particular sense that we teach them to give it is, by the by, a most useful word. A great human philosopher nearly let our secret out when he said that where virtue is concerned. A great human philosopher nearly let our secret out when he said that where virtue is concerned, experience is the mother of illusion. But thanks to a change in fashion, and also, of course, to the historical point of view, we have largely rendered his book innocuous. How valuable time is to us may be gauged by the fact that the enemy allowed us so little of it. The majority of the human race dies in infancy. Of the survivors, a good many die in youth. It is obvious to him that human birth is important chiefly as a qualification for human death, and death is solely as the gate to that other kind of life. We are allowed to work on only a select minority of the race, for what the humans call a normal life is the exception. Selected minority of the human race for what humans call a normal life is the exception. Apparently, he wants some, but only very few, of the human animals with which he is peopling heaven to have had the experience of resisting us through an earthly life of 60 or 70 years. Well, there is our opportunity. The smaller it is, the better we must use it. Whatever you do, keep your patients safe as you possibly can. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.